Is Russia weaponizing winter? After months of attacking critical energy infrastructure in Ukraine, millions of people are now living without power in freezing conditions. But will this make Ukraine more likely to negotiate with Russia or harden their resolve to fight on? I'm Melinda Nusofora, and today on The Newsmakers, we're looking at winter in Ukraine. It's cold and dark in Ukraine as millions of residents are now living completely without or with very limited power. Russia has been carrying out massive attacks on the country's energy infrastructure almost weekly since October. As technicians struggle to repair one part of the grid, another missile lands on a different area. The cumulative effect could have catastrophic consequences for the country. Kyiv's Mayor Vitaly Klitschko says some of the city's 3 million people may need to be evacuated. Kyiv says the attacks intended to harm civilians are a war crime. Moscow denies this, but last week it said it would not stop unless Ukraine yielded to their demands. The international community has pledged generators, clothes and food in assistance and has also increased its condemnation of Russia.
President Putin is now trying to use a weapon, use the winter as a weapon of war against Ukraine. And this is horrific, and we need to be prepared for more attacks. That's the reason why NATO allies have stepped up their support to Ukraine.
That was the NATO Secretary General ahead of a two-day meeting held in Romania this week. During the talks, allies promised Kyiv more than $100 million worth of equipment to repair the country's damaged energy infrastructure. Ukraine has welcomed the commitment, but it wants more. Foreign Minister Dmitry Polyanskiy has once again pushed allies to supply more advanced air defences to help shoot down Moscow's missiles before they hit. The US Army has awarded a $1.2 billion contract to an American company to manufacture additional surface-to-air missile systems for Kyiv. But President Volodymyr Zelensky says what his country needs is the US-made Patriot missile defense systems to protect civilian infrastructure.
Sending Patriot surface-to-air missiles to Ukraine would mark a major advance in the kind of air defense support the West is providing. Ukraine does not have personnel equipped to use the Patriots. It would be relying on US personnel to ultimately command the system, and Russia says that would make the US personnel involved fair game. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev says if, as Stoltenberg hinted, NATO were to supply the Ukrainian fanatics with Patriot systems along with NATO personnel, they would immediately become a legitimate target of our armed forces. But there may be a way around this for Ukraine.
If Germany is ready to provide Patriots to Poland, and Poland has nothing against handing these Patriots over to Ukraine, then I think that the solution for the German government is obvious. We are ready to accept them, we are ready to operate them in the safest and most efficient way. And once again, I would like to reiterate that this is a purely defensive weapon.
On Tuesday, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said his country's offer to send Patriots to Poland remains on the table.
While weapons continue to be discussed at the top level, fighting rages on along the frozen front lines. President Zelensky says his forces are preparing an even more powerful counteroffensive and are working on new solutions to the energy and communications issues. But until those solutions are made real, nearly 6 million people across the country are without electricity as temperatures drop below freezing.
It's the second day we're without power and food. More than 60 children are waiting for food, and we cannot prepare anything unless power gets fixed. We need someone to help us prepare hot food for the children. The kids have not eaten since yesterday.
This month of November is practically without heating. I live in a flat in a two-story house, an old house. They turn on the heating at night when there's electricity. And now we have electricity for 4 hours a day.
No electricity, no water, no heating. I have 2 small children and there is no gas at home.
I don't know how we will make it through the winter. Maybe we will freeze and they will take us to Maslakivka, our cemetery.
Kherson can become the second Mariupol. Now, we need to get as many people out as possible. There is no electricity, water and food.
Joining me now from New York is Dmitry Polyanskiy. He's the first deputy permanent representative of Russia to the UN. From Kyiv is Peter Zalmayev, the director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. And from Washington, D.C. is journalist James Carden. He's also served as an advisor to the US-Russia Bilateral Commission at the US State Department. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here on The Newsmakers. Peter, I want to start with you just to give us a flavour of life in the capital at the moment. What are you experiencing on a daily basis as these temperatures hit highs in the minuses and electricity is jeopardised?
Well, right now, as a matter of fact, I'm at a security forum where a lot of our higher-level officials have gathered, including the mayor of Kyiv, Klitschko. We are on the floor -2, meaning that it also doubles up as a bomb shelter, because any sort of meeting such as this needs to take place in a shelter, because we live day to day in expectations of constant shellings. You know, we've had a few of them since October the 10th. We're expecting another one at any moment, because Vladimir Putin remains bent on his goal of knocking Ukraine into Stone Age, depriving us of all access to electricity, to water, because he hasn't had any success militarily. So we're coping, we're learning to cope with the new reality of darkened streets, increased traffic accidents, because drivers are also learning on the go how to avoid other drivers in situations of complete darkness. We're co-working and huddling in cafes, etc. You know, it provides for a sense of community. There are some positives as well. We haven't hit the worst yet, obviously. We don't know the extent of the damage. We are yet to suffer what it will mean to have a full blackout. Right now, the mayor, as I'm speaking, is discussing the possibility of a full evacuation of the city, something we've never dealt with, but, you know, we will have to. The one thing that remains certain is that none of us is thinking about capitulating to Russia.
Dmitry, let me bring you in here straight after Peter. We've heard from emergency services in Ukraine saying that people are dying in their homes because they're lighting fires for warmth. And yet you yourself have said that Russia's special operation is about preserving civilian life. So how does Russia then defend targeting civilian energy infrastructure?
Well, that's true, everything that you said, and I would like to welcome Peter, and I would like to reassure him that the only thing he should be fearful of should be Ukrainian stray missiles and the missiles from Ukrainian air defense, because that's, in fact, the only things that are hitting civilian infrastructure. And I think that the Ukrainian officials know it perfectly well.
So you deny that Russia is hitting Ukrainian energy infrastructure?
No, I do not deny that.
Okay.
I do not deny that that we're hitting Ukrainian energy infrastructure, but Peter was speaking about being at the second floor in the basement, waiting for Russian attack, so he can be absolutely safe about this, unless, of course, Ukrainian stray missile hits him, as it usually happens. But as for infrastructure, I think it's very simple, because the infrastructure is used not only for civilian purposes, but also for military purposes, and we have to be mindful of this, because we have to be reacting to Ukrainian belligerent statements and the statements of NATO that Ukraine and NATO want to continue this situation until Russia is defeated. And of course, we don't understand where all this wishful thinking comes from, but it's up to Ukrainian and Western side, of course, to decide. So we have to be vigilant, and we have to weaken Ukrainian military complex. We have to prevent deliveries of arms from Western countries, and that's our main objective.
So even though that, yes, obviously the military is also reliant on this energy infrastructure, is Russia then happy to accept civilian casualties?
we are not happy to accept civilian casualties. We warned repeatedly that Ukrainian air defense represents a danger for this country. And there are a lot of examples, we cited them in Security Council, when indeed the missiles were hitting civilian objects that were fired from Ukrainian air defense system. Melinda, may I quote the NATO spokesperson James Shear in his statement of May 25, 1999, when he was asked the question, I quote, "Why are you depriving 70% of Serbia of not only electricity but also water supply?" And the answer was as following: "I'm afraid electricity also drives command and control system. If President Milosevic really wants all of his population to have water and electricity, all he has to do is to accept NATO's 5 conditions, and we will stop the campaign. But as long as he doesn't do so, we will continue to attack those targets which provide electricity for his armed forces." It's not me, it's Mr. Shear. I don't understand why the position of NATO countries is different this time. They should understand our military calculations.
James, let me bring you in here. We have heard from Jens Stoltenberg accusing Russia of weaponizing winter, but surely this isn't a new concept. Ukraine and its allies can't be surprised by this.
No, they shouldn't be. This is how we conducted our campaign against Serbia, as your guest just said, and the shock and awe campaign against Iraq in 2003. Unfortunately, this is the way modern war is waged, and why it's so tragic, and why I would hope that there are some moves being made, perhaps not publicly, towards a negotiated settlement. I think that this thing ends not as a victory, battlefield victory for either side, but at the negotiating table. And that is my sincere hope, a minority one, unfortunately, but a sincere hope from Washington.
Well, at this week's NATO meeting in Bucharest, foreign ministers reconfirmed their commitment to Ukraine and dedicated additional funds for the rebuilding. Peter, for you and from what you're hearing from Mayor Klitschko, can the repairs to infrastructure be done in time before we hit the depths of winter?
Well, hopefully, yes. We obviously cannot predict the future. And obviously the other side is also watching these deliveries of hundreds of powerful generators from various members of the alliance. And then the U.S. has just announced a $55 million package worth of generators. Sweden has announced a record package of aid, both humanitarian and military. France and Finland, and on and on and on. We just hope that they arrive soon enough. And just to come back to what James said when he expressed his sincere wish of a peaceful negotiation, even when NATO officials such as Jens Stoltenberg say that they understand that every war ends at a negotiating table. I mean, what is there to negotiate with now for Ukraine, which is winning this war? If it is clear that Vladimir Putin is in his interest to freeze this conflict because his army is suffering from a lack of fighting spirit, morale. It's running out of weaponry. This is clearly not the time to finish this and to end and freeze this at this point. Simply because this, and I will just refer to Jens Stoltenberg's words, this will send a wrong signal that you can be rewarded with territorial gains just because you are larger, just because you are able and are willing to forego laws of war and fight very dirty, which is what Vladimir Putin has been doing. This sends a wrong precedent to the world, and I think NATO officials, Western officials, understand this very well.
Dmitry, let me bring you in there then to respond. I mean, there are accusations of war crimes being made against Russia. How does Russia respond to that and the fact that, whether or not civilians are the intended target, they have become collateral damage?
You mean accusations of Russian soldiers being tortured by Ukrainian forces? Even this kind of accusations?
No. I mean the accusations that Russia is directly targeting civilian infrastructure and that would constitute a war crime.
I just explained to you the reasoning why we are targeting civilian, not a civilian, but energy and logistic infrastructure. This is the logic of preventing Ukrainian forces from delivering arms. And you just heard Peter's statement, which is quite belligerent, and I think it explains in the clearest way why negotiations are not possible right now, and why, unfortunately, Ukraine will have to face this kind of situation until its leadership and the leadership of NATO countries will understand that there are absolutely no reasons to expect any kind of defeat from Russian forces. This kind of wishful thinking about Russian missile running low, I think we heard it in March, we heard it in July, in September, and now we still have missiles, and we still have a lot of them. But it's not that we want to use them on painful situation for Ukrainian citizens. But Ukrainian citizens, of course, need to make a choice and to understand the real intention of the Kiev regime, and their eyes should open on all of this, and they should understand the way that this crisis in Ukraine should finish. And by the way, I also need to indicate that now you are crying wolf about problems with electricity and water in Kiev, in other cities of Ukraine, but you're forgetting that Donbas has been living in such situation for 8 years, and nobody was providing anything from Western countries to these regions. Nobody was absolutely taking into any consideration suffering of people in Donbas, and now there is real double standards vis-a-vis people of Donbas displayed by Western countries, and that's
Peter,
absolutely
you are
clear.
gesturing quite viciously there to respond. What would you like to say?
I just need to say I am a native of the Donbas, and I have, like, up until the recent times, my family was living there. I have my classmates living there. It's an invented reality that Russians are living in under Putin, because who has sold him this idea, but no one else is buying in it. The entire 8 years, there've been like a handful of civilians who have died in the Donbas, starting in 2015. They have completely invented this idea of a genocide to try to make it look like what was happening when Serbia started slaughtering Albanians, which was a true genocide, not this invented one. And the same way they're trying to, negate the fact of Bucha, the atrocities in Bucha, Kherson, Izum, and Mariupol. Let me just say, Indian, Chinese, Indian, African, Latin American journalists have visited countries that are friendly, some of them, to Vladimir Putin, to Russia. They have one after another witnessed what happened there. If you have decided in Russia to live in an invented world, an invented reality, that does not mean that everyone else will. Everyone in the world is seeing these atrocities for what they are.
All right, we're not going to let ourselves get too bogged down in Donbass, because that's obviously an issue that we could have an entire separate show about. But James, I want to ask you about how the United States, what are the murmurings there as this continues into winter? We have the US committing another dispatch of defensive weapons. Is there coming a point where perhaps this is going to get very expensive in winter, that the US is going to start wavering? Will the West start wavering?
Well, no, I don't think so. The only sign of that has come from General Milley, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who expressed concern that we are indeed running out of supplies, military supplies to give to Kyiv. These are concerns that have been shared by the Germans as well. I would suggest that things are not going to be so great for Ukraine this coming winter once the ground freezes. I understand, Peter's position. I worry that Ukraine is going to be facing down between 400 and 500,000 well-armed Russian troops, while the West is running out of military supplies this coming winter.
James, I want to
and I think that
you...
his point is well taken about negotiations, and he's right. The time to negotiate probably isn't right now, but the time to negotiate was really in 2015 when the Minsk process was undertaken. But
James, let me
seems
ask you this. We've heard the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Kuleba, again pushing for Patriot air defences from the US. Why is the US happy, do you think, to send NASAMS but not Patriots?
because of the time it takes to train up staff, to train up soldiers to use this extremely complicated system. That is at least what I've heard from American military officials who I've spoken to.
Dmitry, I want to ask you, we've heard a suggestion that if Germany gives its Patriots to Poland and then Poland passes its Patriots on to Ukraine, that could avoid the type of escalation that the former Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev has warned of. What do you think about that suggestion?
Well, I wouldn't dwell into these difficult relations between Germany and Poland, and I wouldn't dwell into the situation in the European Union. There's another thing I want to do. I really want to apologize to all these viewers who just now had to hear this emotional statement by Peter, because we really did hit his nerve for exposing this backbone backbone lie of Kiev regime about the fact that Donbass wasn't touched, that it was absolutely safe. I think that it was a clear illustration of kind of people that we have to deal with, and the people watching our program will have now absolutely better understanding why Russia has to complete all the goals of its special military operation.
If I can bring you back to the question again with regards to Patriots, why is the Patriot air defence system such a sticking point for Russia?
It's not a sticking point for us. I think if it's supplied to Ukraine, it will have the same fate as any other Western arms supplied to Ukraine. It will be destroyed by our forces. So be it Patriot, be it anything else, it doesn't matter very much. It will just prolong the suffering for Ukrainian people, and it prolong the agony of Zelensky regime. That's it.
Peter, let me ask you this then. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, on Thursday has said that the United States and NATO are participants in this conflict because of the weaponry support they are supplying to Ukraine. Is this Ukraine's defence, or is this the West's defence for Ukraine?
Well, first of all, obviously, it takes two to tango. You know, without Western-provided weaponry to Ukraine, Ukraine probably we would not be sitting here. I would not be sitting talking with you from Kiev. And without Ukraine's resilience, because Ukraine's willingness to fight and their understanding they did not want to be a part of Russia, which is what this war is about. It's a colonial war of conquest. Ukrainians have said time and again, and finally, very decisively, we are not going to be part of Russia, especially when Russia is run by a lunatic who has created an alternate reality, in Russia. So this idea that Russia is fighting with NATO, it allows them to really, to defend their very poor performance of their army, which has been exposed and ridiculed for all the world to see. The second largest army, and contrary to what you said, what James said, you're talking about 500,000 Russian soldiers, well equipped. I don't think so. A lot of them are equipped with 1960s, rusting, rifles, etc. It's not a very well-equipped army. Putin did not, expect the kind of resilience that Ukrainians put up, and so they went in completely unprepared for what they were facing. And the fact that they're saying they're fighting against NATO should really untie NATO's hands in their dealings with Putin. If he's already created this reality that we're fighting with NATO, what is there to be afraid about NATO? I'm speaking to NATO, to the US. You're talking about escalation? Well, in the minds of Russians, they're already fighting with NATO. So what's preventing you from taking a much more active role and, killing off the rest of this ragtag army at the service of a crazy dictator?
Right. Now, because I want to ensure that we remain impartial, and we're going to give our final word to you, James, so that we cannot definitely look as if we're favouring either side. So, James, let me put the final question to you very briefly, if you could. You said that there are going to be tougher times ahead for Ukraine once the ground freezes this winter. Very briefly, give us an overview of the information you're getting from military insiders in the US.
Well, I think the expectation is that there's going to be a major offensive this winter. And I would simply close out by saying that regretfully, the comments this morning by both of your guests show why we are really in such a situation where negotiations seem unfortunately impossible.
It is a very difficult situation everyone finds themselves in, indeed. I would like to thank you all for joining us here on The Newsmakers. We appreciate your time. Dmitry, Peter and James, thank you. And to our viewers, thank you for watching. You can follow us, of course, on Twitter and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Melinda Nusofora. We'll see you next time.